There are moments in history that disappear between the pages. Days erased, rewritten, or deliberately forgotten. 17 days that shattered a crown, silenced a queen, and changed the fate of a kingdom. This is not the story of Anne Boleyn's rise. It is the story of her fall. The hidden days that began in quiet corridors and ended in the heart of the tower. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because what follows is not a simple retelling. It's a descent into the silence that consumed one of the most powerful women in English history. Anne Boleyn, the queen who challenged a church, defied a king, and was broken by whispers that never needed to be proven true. The year is 1536. Spring in England carries a strange chill. The court dances, the tapestries gleam, and yet, under every polished smile there hides unease. The queen is no longer untouchable. The king's gaze has grown distant, his words colder, his patience thinner, and feels it before anyone dares to speak it. Her crown grows heavier, her allies fewer. The first day passes with small signs. A look not returned, a letter unanswered, a rumor repeated in the corridors. She dismisses them as envy, the common venom of court life. But the air itself seems to change. Servants bow too quickly, eyes linger too long. The second day brings a tremor through the court. Cromwell, the king's shadow, has begun his quiet work. Letters sealed in wax leave his chambers before dawn. Names are listed, not of enemies, but of men loyal to the queen. The music of the court turns hollow. Each note feels like an echo of something ending. By the fifth day, the walls have ears. Anne's laughter no longer rings as it once did. Even her closest ladies falter in their loyalty, glancing toward the doors as though expecting someone to burst through. Her brother's visits grow brief and guarded. And still, the queen carries herself with grace, because to show fear would be to confess guilt, even when there is none. The eighth day drips with tension. The king leaves for hunting, but it is not the ride that matters. It is who does not go with him, and remains behind, pacing her chamber, the scent of wax and roses heavy in the air. The bells of the chapel toll softly in the distance, marking the passage of hours that stretch like years. She begins to write letters, pleas, explanations, reflections. Some will vanish before they reach their readers. Others will never be read at all. By the 10th day, the court has shifted. The queen's friends speak in whispers. Her enemies speak in smiles. The king, once her passionate defender, now listens to the same voices he once silenced for her. It is not fury that drives him now, but weariness, and the dangerous need for peace. The 12th day is quiet, too quiet. The queen waits. Her mirror reflects not vanity but searching, a face trying to read its own future. She touches the necklace at her throat, the one with the golden bee, and for a fleeting moment, she wonders what it will feel like to have it taken from her. By the 14th day, London itself begins to hum with unease. The taverns whisper her name, the streets carry her story. Each telling adds another layer of accusation. Treason, infidelity, witchcraft. Words that once would have been laughed away now hang like weapons in the air. On the 15th day, the queen no longer prays for mercy, but for understanding. How quickly the favor of a king can turn to shadow. She has seen it before. She once stood on the other side of it. The irony does not escape her. The same court that celebrated her coronation now prepares to witness her fall. The 16th day feels unreal. The world grows slower, the voices around her distant. The queen still speaks, still holds her head high, but her words echo without weight. The truth no longer matters. History has already chosen its version. And then comes the 17th day, the day the silence becomes complete. The day when the queen's crown turns from gold to memory. The day the woman becomes a legend, not by her deeds, but by what was said of her. But the story doesn't end here. It never does, because every reign leaves its ghosts, and every silence hides more than it reveals. In the shadows of the tower, her name still lingers. The 17 hidden days are not gone. They are simply waiting to be remembered. And beyond those days, the story continues. The courtiers who rose upon her fall, the king who could not find peace, the daughter who would one day wear a crown forged from her mother's ruin. The echo spreads outward, into history, into legend, into every whisper that begins with the words, "She was guilty, or was she?" The court moves on. It always does. New gowns are sewn, new alliances whispered, new smiles worn like armor. The great machine of power does not stop for grief, it feeds on it. And yet, behind the velvet curtains, Anne Boleyn's absence is a presence. Her laughter once filled these halls. Now, the silence she left behind is heavier than the crown she wore. The king appears calm. His hunts resume, his prayers return, his conscience cloaked in justification. To those who ask, he speaks of betrayal, of divine justice, of necessity. But in the quiet hours, when the court sleeps and the candles burn low, Cromwell's papers grow thicker. He writes as if to outrun the guilt that lingers in his ink. Each letter signed, each record sealed, becomes another stone in the wall of forgetfulness being built around her memory. But walls crumble, secrets breathe. The letters she wrote, the ones that never reached the king, are said to have vanished, and yet whispers claim some survived. Somewhere, in the hands of those who dared to remember her not as a villain, but as a woman. Days stretch into months. The queen's apartments are stripped bare, her tapestries replaced, her belongings inventoried, her initials scraped away from the stone. But one mark remains, carved faintly into the wall. A falcon, wings spread, crowned. It was her emblem, the royal falcon of Anne Boleyn. It endures, though the woman does not. Beyond the tower, the world begins to rewrite her. Pamphlets circulate, songs are sung in taverns. Some call her a witch, some a martyr, some a fool. None can agree, and yet all speak her name. It is as if by destroying her, the kingdom ensured she would never truly die. In another chamber, far from the tower, a child grows. A daughter, bright-eyed and silent, watched by those who do not yet know her destiny. Elizabeth. The echo of Anne's defiance will one day rise in her voice. Through her, the broken queen will live again. Not in sorrow, but in strength. And so the story loops back upon itself. The crown that destroyed and will one day rest on her child's head. The men who accused her will fade from memory, while her name, cursed, sanctified, immortalized, will outlast them all. Still, the mystery of those 17 days remains. Each year, historians return to the letters, the confessions, the court records, and each time, the truth shifts like dust in sunlight. Was she guilty or merely inconvenient? Did she fall by the will of a king or by the fear of men who saw in her too much power? Every answer leads to another question, and every question leads deeper into the maze of Tudor politics, where truth itself was a weapon. There are records of a night never confirmed, never denied, when the king walked alone through the corridors of Whitehall, his hand trailing the stone wall as though seeking something lost. Some say he whispered her name, others say he cursed it, but all agree that from that night on, his eyes grew dimmer, his temper sharper, his heart quieter. He had won his freedom but lost his peace. And so the story continues. From Anne's fall to Cromwell's rise, from the ashes of one queen to the coronation of another. History moves forward, but it carries her shadow in every step. The falcon, the queen, the flame that burned too bright. And still, there are corners of history untouched, moments unseen, names erased but not forgotten. The 17 hidden days were only the beginning, because every queen who came after her, Jane, and of Cleves, Catherine, Catherine again, carried a fragment of Anne's ghost in her crown. The pattern would repeat, as if cursed. Love, power, suspicion, ruin. Each queen, a reflection of the one before. Each fall, an echo of Anne's. Time itself does not heal the wound she left. It only hides it beneath layers of ceremony, silence, and carefully chosen words. But somewhere, in a forgotten archive, in a letter never burned, the truth waits. And the story continues. Power is never lost in a single moment. It unravels quietly, thread by thread, word by word, until the crown itself feels hollow. And Boleyn's fall was not an accident of passion. It was designed, planned by men who smiled as they buried her. Each step calculated with precision, each silence rehearsed. Thomas Cromwell, the king's right hand, the engineer of reform, the master of survival. He once served Anne's rise, but the tide of favor is a dangerous sea. When Anne's influence began to threaten his own ambitions, the alliance fractured. What began as policy became vengeance. He understood that power is never taken. It is transferred. And to strip a queen of power, one must first strip her of her image. Cromwell did not need to destroy her truth. He only needed to replace it. A rumor whispered in the right ear could do more than 1,000 swords. So the letters began again, careful, deliberate, poisonous. Allegations of adultery with men of her court, her musicians, her friends, even her own brother. Each accusation impossible, yet each one believable enough to stain. The king, weary and wounded by her defiance, did not ask for proof. He asked for silence, and Cromwell gave it to him. The court became a stage, the trial a performance. The evidence was fragile, but the conclusion was already written. The men accused with her, Norris, Smeaton, Weston, Brereton, George Boleyn, became pieces in the same cruel game. One confession under torture, one coerced testimony, one nod from the king, and the pattern was complete. Justice had been transformed into theater. But there is something history often forgets. Even Cromwell, in his brilliance, feared what he was creating. He knew that by crafting a false queen, he was also crafting a legend that could never die. Every lie he wrote about her made her larger than life. Every false sin became a symbol of her power. He destroyed her body and immortalized her story. The king, meanwhile, walked through the halls of his palace surrounded by silence. He had what he wanted: freedom, control, and the promise of peace. But the court felt colder. The air itself seemed thinner. His new queen, Jane Seymour, gentle and quiet, did not speak of the woman before her. No one did. And yet, when she walked through the same chambers and once ruled, even she must have felt the echo. The kingdom changed, but the ghost of and lingered in the smallest things. In the books she once read, in the prayer she once whispered, in the eyes of her daughter, sharp, unreadable, waiting. Meanwhile, Cromwell's power grew. He became the architect not just of Anne's death, but of England's transformation. Churches were dissolved, monasteries looted, and the authority of Rome shattered forever. Anne had once dreamed of reform, but it was Cromwell who finished it, not for faith but for control. Her cause became his weapon, and in that irony lies the cruelest truth of all. Years would pass before the architect would face his own scaffold. But on the day he did, some said the crowd whispered Anne's name, as if the wheel of fate had turned full circle, as if the ghost of the broken queen had reached out from history to claim what was hers. And yet the story does not end there. It never does, because every betrayal births another. Every lie becomes the seed of its own undoing, and every crown that rests on blood will tremble in time. The echoes of Anne's fall would shape every queen that followed, each learning the same quiet truth, that to love a king is to stand on the edge of a sword. To wear his crown is to live in the shadow of her memory. And beyond them all, her daughter grows, a silent witness to history. Elizabeth, born from scandal, destined for sovereignty. The blood that doomed and will one day build an empire. The voice that was silenced will one day speak through her child's throne. But for now, the tower still stands. The stones remember. History pretends that silence is peace, but silence is where truth grows wild. In the quiet corners of royal nurseries, in the margins of letters, in the whispers of servants, and Boleyn's shadow lives, shaping a child who should never have survived the story that made her. Elizabeth is small when the world decides what she is, the bastard daughter of a disgraced queen, a child not meant to inherit, not meant to be remembered. Her name is spoken with pity, sometimes with fear, but never with the reverence that will one day follow it. And yet, even in those first forgotten years, something in her gaze unsettles those who look too long. It is not defiance, not yet, but awareness, the kind that watches and waits and learns. The girl listens to stories she is not meant to hear, of a mother beautiful and proud, clever and doomed, a mother who spoke her mind, who changed a kingdom, and paid for it with her life. The details shift with each telling, saint or sinner, witch or queen, but the child learns the only truth that matters. Her mother's voice was too strong for her time, and time itself had to destroy her. Servants speak of and in secret, their voices trembling as though summoning a ghost. They say she had eyes like fire, that she could charm and wound with the same word. They say she dreamed of greatness for her daughter. Elizabeth, half asleep, remembers none of it, and yet dreams of crowns. Years pass like the turning of a slow wheel. The court changes queens again and again, each one repeating its fate in softer echoes. Jane Seymour dies in childbirth, and of Cleves is cast aside. Catherine Howard, young and radiant, loses her head to the same cold blade that ended Anne's. The child grows older, and every fall teaches her the same lesson. Beauty fades, obedience fails, but knowledge endures. Anne's greatest gift to her daughter was not her blood. It was her mind. Elizabeth begins to read what few women dare. Languages, philosophy, history, scripture. Each word another key to the prison of her birth. In the stillness of night, she traces the name she is not supposed to write. Anne Boleyn. The name becomes a vow not of revenge, but of becoming. She will reclaim what was broken, not by force, but by outlasting everyone who broke it. Around her, men whisper again. They watch the girl who smiles like her mother and calculates like her father. They wonder which side of her blood will win. But Elizabeth already knows that sides are illusions. Her mother taught her that truth is rarely pure and never safe. If she is to survive, she must learn to wear masks, not to hide, but to rule. Years later, when she finally walks through the same tower gates that once held her mother, she does not tremble. The stones that once condemned now bow to her footsteps. The falcon that symbolized Anne's reign returns in silence, unseen, in the way Elizabeth stands, in the steadiness of her voice, in the way she demands to be heard. The queen who will one day be called Gloriana carries within her every fragment of her mother's broken crown. The gold is tarnished, the jewels scattered, but the spirit remains, reforged, relentless, eternal. And the kingdom that once executed and now kneels before her daughter. The cycle completes itself, and yet the story does not end. It folds into itself again, because power never sleeps and shadows never fade. Power, once taken, never returns unchanged, passes through blood, through memory, through fire. By the time Elizabeth stands before the throne, England itself has grown weary, torn between faiths, ruled by fear, uncertain of its soul. And yet, in that uncertainty, she sees opportunity. She does not reach for the crown as her mother once did. She lets it come to her, as if destiny itself has been waiting for her hand. The coronation is not just ceremony, it is resurrection. The same kingdom that once called her illegitimate now calls her majesty. The same streets that once whispered her mother's name in shame now echo with bells and cheers. And somewhere, beneath the pageantry, Anne Boleyn's ghost stirs, not as sorrow, but as vindication. Elizabeth understands what no one else dares to say. The crown is not protection, it is a weapon, and she must wield it without hesitation. Her court is a labyrinth of old loyalties and new betrayals, filled with men who smile and bow but count the days until her failure. She watches them all. Every gesture, every whisper, every promise. Her silence becomes her shield, her composure, her sword. She has learned from the fall of others. From her mother, the cost of passion. From her father, the art of power. From the broken queens before her, the price of being loved. And so she chooses something different. She will not be anyone's wife, anyone's possession, anyone's downfall. She becomes married to the throne itself. The Virgin Queen by choice, not by purity. A title that becomes her armor and her myth. The men who once sought to control her find themselves outmatched by her patience. Ambassadors write of her wit, her sharp tongue, her impossible grace. She rules as her father never could, not through fear, but through mastery of perception. Every gesture calculated, every silence intentional, every word polished like a blade. She becomes an idea larger than flesh, the embodiment of England's survival. And through that idea and lives again, her mother's ambition reborn as strategy, her defiance refined into diplomacy. But even legends cast shadows. The court still hums with danger. Plots rise and vanish like waves. Papal excommunications, noble rebellions, the endless struggle between old faith and new. And behind it all, Elizabeth feels the same tension that haunted her mother. To rule as a woman in a world built for men is to walk forever at the edge of betrayal. She can never falter. She can never forgive weakness. Every smile conceals suspicion. Every alliance carries poison. Still, she endures. For 40 years, she holds the kingdom together not through conquest but through will. Her words become scripture. Her image, sacred. Painters immortalize her as a goddess of victory, a being above mortal doubt. But behind the paint, behind the jeweled gowns and golden light, she is still the daughter of the condemned queen. And in her private hours, she remembers. There are stories of a locket she kept, small, delicate, shaped like a heart. Inside, a portrait of her mother, faded but unmistakable. She never showed it in public, never spoke of it aloud. But she wore it close to her skin, as if to remind herself that her crown was built upon sacrifice. Sometimes, when she walks through the corridors of Whitehall, she pauses before a certain window, where the light hits just right, the same way it might have when and stood there long before the end. Elizabeth does not pray. She does not weep. She only whispers to the silence. They remember you now. Time is a patient sculptor. It erodes empires, silences kings, and buries palaces beneath dust. Yet some names resist decay. Anne Boleyn's is one of them. 500 years have passed since the axe fell, and still the world whispers her name as if she might hear. She has become more than a queen, more than a tragedy. She is the measure by which we still weigh power, the question we still cannot answer. How much truth can a woman speak before the world decides to silence her? Her life began as a promise, burned as a scandal, and endured as a legend. Through her daughter, through her defiance, through every retelling, she claimed the one thing her enemies could never take: eternity. Now the tower stands in quiet reverence, its stones cold, its ravens watchful. But in the stillness, if you listen long enough, you might hear the faint rhythm of a heartbeat that once defied a king, not in anger, not in fear, but in remembrance. The falcon still flies, not for vengeance, not for sorrow, but for truth, carried on the wind of centuries, untamed, unbroken, unforgotten. Anne Boleyn, the queen who was never meant to be remembered, became the one history could never let go. And as long as her story is told, the crown that broke her will never truly fade.